Hello everyone and welcome to Ravade Reads, the series where I talk about comics, what happens in them, who made them, what I like and don't like, and whether or not I think you should read them. It's like a mix between a reaction video, a podcast, maybe even a tiny bit of ASMR, meant to give you the gist of a comic while leaving enough for you to discover on your own. Today I'm going to begin reading through Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead comic series by starting off with Volume 1, Days Gone By. I wanted to read through this series because not only is the main television series ending after 12 years, but because I think The Walking Dead in general is probably just the best zombie series ever, because of its focus on the characters and not the zombies. I read this series a long time ago, but it's been a while. I know the general idea of things, but it'll still be pretty fresh for me to jump into alongside you guys. And just as a warning, this is a pretty graphic series because, zombies and such, so you've been warned. It's time for Issue 1. Kentucky police officer Rick Grimes and his partner Shane get into a firefight against an escaped con. In the shootout, Rick takes a shotgun blast to the side of the chest. Immediately, Rick awakens in a hospital bed, alone. Traversing through the hospital, he finds the place desolate, as all its workers and residents have vanished. That is, until he stumbles upon a room crowded by decayed, reanimated corpses. Just barely escaping the hospital, he steals a bike and travels through town back to his home, finding the surrounding area just as bad as the hospital. Realizing that his wife Lori and his son Carl are not at home, he ends up taking a shovel to the back of the head by a kid named Dwayne, accompanied by his father Morgan. The two realize that he isn't one of the dead, so they take him into their safe house. When Rick wakes up, Morgan explains the situation, how no one knows what started it, but the dead now roam the earth. It's important to note as well that the idea of a zombie isn't known of in this world, or at least not popular enough to where the average person knows what a zombie is. Morgan also states that before the government went radio silent, they said to head down to major cities where they could protect people. Rick believes his wife and son might be in Atlanta, so they grab some gear and cars from the police station, and Rick parts way with the two, believing everything will go back to normal soon. On his way to Atlanta, Rick stops to put down one of the zombies, or walkers, that he passed by on his way out of the hospital, and a tear rolls down his face. Little does he know, things will never go back to normal. I think this was a pretty solid first issue. All in all, it actually felt pretty short, but I think it was good, and even if it didn't feel conclusive enough, I'm not really sure how to put it. It just feels like there should have been some kind of bigger event or realization in this issue other than, oh no, zombies, well, everything will be good soon, time to go to Atlanta. Anyway, the black and white art by Tony Moore could be looked at as an interesting callback to classic zombie films, along with the lack of thought bubbles, giving it a more realistic character drama feel that it's going for. And the lack of awareness of their present situation also gives an eerie tone, because obviously things are much worse than they realize. Let's continue Rick's journey to Atlanta in Issue 2. Rick doesn't make it far by driving due to the lack of gas in the surrounding areas. Forced to abandon his car, he takes his bag of guns and travels to a farm where he stumbles upon a family who've killed themselves. Making his way to the barn after throwing up, he finds a horse and decides to ride it on his way to Atlanta. On the ride, Rick talks to himself, reminiscing about the birth of his son Carl. He thought it would be good to think of a good memory during this terrible time, but it just makes him feel worse. Making his way into the city, he finds that it was not the safe haven he was promised. In fact, quite the opposite. Seemingly out of nowhere, he is surrounded by a horde of the undead, and once again barely escapes them. Killing a few walkers along the way, Rick runs into another survivor, Glenn, who had significantly more experience in escaping the undead than Rick does. Glenn explains that you can't go into the cities anymore, they're infested with the dead, and that the government's plan failed. Rick breaks down crying, believing his wife and son are gone. But when Glenn leads him to the camp with fellow survivors, he finds that Lori and Carl are actually alive. This was certainly a more action-packed yet hopeful issue. We now know that the government was kinda dumb to pack everyone into one place, but given that people don't know how zombies work or anything like that, I guess it makes sense. We get introduced to Glenn, one of the best characters in the series, and the reveal that Lori and Carl are still alive. It's kind of funny that it happens literally right after Rick thinks they're dead. You'd think they'd build up a little suspense or something, but oh well. Now that Rick is reunited with his family, let's see how the drama unfolds in Issue 3. As it turns out, not only did Lori and Carl survive, but so did Rick's partner Shane, who was the one to save him and keep him alive all this time. Shane gives a tour of the group, introducing Alan, his wife Donna, their twins Billy and Ben, along with Dale, Jim, Carol, her daughter Sophia, and the sisters Amy and Andrea. You got all that? Because that's a lot of characters to keep track of, and the black and white art style kind of makes it difficult to keep track of who's who without giving them any sort of unique color palettes. Rick and Lori finally share a quiet moment at night, taking in the horrors that they've seen. No one really sleeps much anymore given the circumstances. Rick's had it worse because of the coma he awakened from. He had to deal with the full-on apocalypse out of nowhere. Now that he's found his family, he can finally let himself feel scared. Rick wakes up early and heads outside the tent he was staying in with Lori and Carl. He finds Shane there, saying that they're going hunting today. After taking a quick shower in Dale's RV, Dale gives a warning to Rick not to trust Shane, saying that he's seen the way that he looks at Lori. Rick says that they're best friends and they have nothing to worry about, so I'm sure nothing bad will happen here. While out hunting, Lori, Donna, and Carol return from washing clothes in the pond but are attacked by a walker. Luckily, Dale swoops in and decapitates it before it bites her. But the thing is, that didn't kill it. Its head still chomps around on the ground, something the survivors didn't know was possible. Alan shoots it in the head, killing the walker, causing Rick and Shane to run back to the group. As Rick embraces his family, we see Shane staring from afar, the jealousy seeping in. We've now set up our main conflict and introduced many new characters. See, the thing about The Walking Dead is that it's not really about the zombies. That's just the scenario that pushes people to their limits. It's really about the characters and their relationships, how people of all different backgrounds come together and change when pushed to the absolute limit. And as we can see, the apocalypse did no favors for Shane, who's got some nefarious thoughts on his mind. Let's see what shenanigans Shane might get up to in issue 4. The night after Donna's almost death, Rick and Shane have a heated debate over whether or not they should move away from the city due to the amount of walkers in the area. Shane very aggressively believes that they should stay where they are for the government to come rescue them, but Rick isn't so sure. Rick and Glenn devise a plan to retrieve guns from a gun store during their supply run to Atlanta. Lori doesn't understand why Rick has to risk his life again after just coming back, but he tells her not to worry and that he needs to help Glenn. Rick, having realized that the walkers most likely differentiate humans and the dead through smell, decides to chop one of them up and cover him and Glenn in its guts to mask their scent. As they travel into the city, they learn that it actually works, and Glenn throws up quite a bit. After raiding the gun store, it begins to downpour, washing off the guts from their clothes, and the walkers start to notice them. They fight their way out of the city, and Rick even gets bit on the shoulder, but the padding on his police jacket protects him. He's gotta be the luckiest man alive at this point. Back at camp, Lori waits for Rick in the rain. Shane approaches, saying to come back inside and that he'll keep her company, but she tells him to stop. It's revealed that while they thought Rick was dead, they had a brief affair, but Lori makes it clear that that's over now that Rick is alive. Probably the most action-packed issue so far, lots of gory zombie violence in the city, and the revelation that Shane and Lori did the sexy time will definitely lead to some upcoming drama. But it does raise an interesting question. How did Rick even survive for a month in a coma post-apocalypse? I mean, he wasn't eating, drinking, anything. I mean, it's no wonder they thought he was dead. He definitely should have been, but, this is a zombie comic after all, so realism isn't exactly that much of a focus. Will Rick and Glenn make it back to camp in issue 5? I mean, obviously, but let's just see what happens. A few weeks have passed since Rick and Glenn returned to camp with the guns. As winter sets in, they all practice shooting to be better prepared against the walkers. Rick starts to teach Carl to shoot and even allows him to carry a gun with him, which upsets Lori. She thinks that he's way too young to have a gun, being only 7 years old. While out getting firewood, Rick, Shane, and Dale have a conversation about the cold and the weather conditions getting worse, when Shane has a pretty aggressive outburst about staying where they are. Seems like it's only getting worse for him mentally. At night, the group gathers around a fire as they cook some deer meat, recounting their lives before it all went down. Glenn was a pizza delivery guy, Dale was retired with his wife driving around in their RV, Andrea was driving Amy back to college, and so on. But as Amy headed back to the RV to use the bathroom, she gets ambushed by walkers who tear her apart. The group fights off the walkers, and Carl even manages to save his mom by using his gun. When the fight's over, it's revealed that Jim was badly scratched by one of them. The question is, will he turn? Another solid issue. I think it would have been nice to see Rick and Glenn's return from Atlanta, but I guess the story just decided to skip that and keep things moving. We got a lot of insight on these characters, our first major character death, and the possibility of death for another. In issue 6, the final issue of volume 1, let's discover the fate of Jim, and possibly others. The next morning, they bury Amy and say some words about her. Andrea stays behind while the others head back to the camp, the winter weather becoming harsher. And so is Jim's condition. He doesn't have long before the infection takes over. Rick, Shane, and Carl go out hunting, but things take a turn for the worse. Shane is becoming more violent, and Rick lashes out at him, telling him that something was going to happen sooner or later the longer they stayed near the city. Their arguments upset Carl, and Rick runs back to him. When they get back to camp, Jim knows what he wants. They take him out far from the camp and leave him to die beside a tree. Meanwhile, Andrea has become withdrawn from the group. The next morning, things get even worse. Rick and Shane get into an argument which leads to a physical altercation. Lori steps in and screams at Shane while the whole group watches. Shane runs off, Rick tries to reach him, and Lori breaks down, wondering what is happening to them. While she looks away, Carl chases after them. Everything comes to a head. Shane has a complete breakdown, going off on Rick about how the world has taken everything from him and that there's nothing left. If Rick had just stayed dead, Lori would have come around eventually, they would have been rescued, and it would have all worked out. Shane is about to murder Rick, but Carl steps in and shoots him in the throat. Rick hugs Carl, who says that it's not the same as killing the dead ones. And that concludes issue 6, a cliffhanger ending with everything crashing down around the group. With this issue, we really see what the world of The Walking Dead is, and get a glimpse of what's in store for these characters. No one is coming to rescue them. This is the world now. I guess we'll have to wait until next time to see the effects of Shane's death, but that's The Walking Dead Volume 1, Days Gone By. A great introduction to what I would consider the best zombie story there is. I would definitely recommend this to fans of zombies, fans of horror, and fans of The Walking Dead who haven't read the books, because there's enough differences here to make it its own experience. Things are only going to get darker from here, but until then, hopefully you found this interesting and might want to check out the books yourselves. As for these videos, next time I'll be doing Volume 2, Miles Behind Us. Until then, leave a like on this video, subscribe for more Ravade Reads and other videos that I do, turn on notifications for when I post, and comment what you thought of this little story arc. I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.